We've noticed that the different types of boots have a huge impact based on their height and the construction of the boot on their ankle range of motion. You get anybody who's worn a boot with a big last, you get them to sprint. They feel like their running is really dysfunctional because they're compensating for the lack of movement through the ankle.
Today we're going to talk about mission-specific, task-orientated footwear. I was just wondering if you could maybe elaborate on mission-specific tasks within the police, first responder, fire market, what they're actually doing in footwear, and from there we can elaborate about the appropriate footwear solutions.
Sure. So, I mean, the tasks that different agencies do, there are a lot of similarities, but there's also a lot of very, very diverse differences. So, for example, you could have a military driver in a vehicle, and likewise you'd have a law enforcement officer or someone from fire and rescue driving a vehicle. So you've got to think about how much mobility is required at the ankle to perform that task. But likewise, they then have to jump out of that vehicle, and then they're on foot, and they could be doing tasks with a sprinting, with heavy load, whilst in a contact up the side of a hill across uneven terrain. They could be walking around a fire ground where it's already wet from previous, water spills of other fluids, etc. And then you add the loads on top of that, and then other complexities like whether they have to kneel down, whether they have to squat down, and all those actually have an impact of ankle range of motion themselves.
One thing we would like to speak about is height of footwear. For a long time, the 8-inch, 10-inch boot seems to be the market leader. And obviously it has some positives and potentially some negatives about how that boot fits for every task.
Well, if you have a look at a boot that's got a very high last, and you get anybody who's worn a boot with a big last, you get them to sprint. They feel like their running is really dysfunctional. A lot more knee bend, a lot more movement through the hip because they're compensating for the lack of movement through the ankle. Some of the work we've done with ADA, specifically looking at fire and rescue boots, we've noticed that the different types of boots have a huge impact based on their height and the construction of the boot on their ankle range of motion. And a simple task, what we call the weight-bearing dorsiflexion test, which is where you have your foot on the ground and you bring your knee towards a wall and you see how much range you've got when you compress your ankle joint and then you try to bend. Now this is important because that's one of the primary things that you do when you squat down, when you walk downstairs. Now it may not seem like a big deal, but a couple of degrees of loss in range of motion at the ankle when you're trying to walk downstairs means you've got to rotate to get more range so you can put your foot down, which puts load all the way up your kinetic chain. Let's add load to your body, let's add a slippery surface, and your risks of injury can be huge. The risks of chronic wear through the body can be huge just by something that changes your range of motion at your ankle slightly.
So in saying that though, Rob, there is task-specific footwear. An 8-inch boot would work in certain environments. It is necessary. A 6-inch boot, a 4.5-inch boot, potentially could be used within the field.
Definitely. So again, we talk about fit for task. You're going to wear different types of shoes if you're running on the ground, because you're running on a flat ground. There is no requirement for stability. It's linear translation of force. When you're playing basketball, however, you've got a lot of lateral movement. The requirement for ankle stability is going to be different. So if you get a basketball shoe versus a running shoe, they're going to look different. They're going to have different heights. So it is very much task dependent, and they should be able to switch between the boots based on the task where possible. And not only that, then let's make it a little bit more specific based on the person's anthropometrics and body shape as well. So a taller individual, the higher last will have a less of an impact on a taller individual than it would on a shorter individual, than a smaller framed individual, than somebody who's already had an ankle injury previously or a knee injury. Yep. So if I had a knee injury, the last thing I want to do is do anything that limits my range at my ankle, because that's then going to transfer all that load to that knee. So again, it needs to become individualized, not just mission specific, but person specific as well.
The tactical market has been based around a lot of unisex footwear, particularly an issued 8-inch boot. Now, the biomechanics of a small 5'5" female wearing an 8-inch boot that goes halfway up her calf is obviously going to affect her performance.
Definitely, and so some of the research we've done on load carriage where they're wearing unisex boots, for example, has found that males and females will actually end up with different injuries because of the boot. And typically with the female being of a shorter frame, having a smaller foot, we're finding that it's potentially the width of the boot that becomes problematic. Yep. Because one of the things you have to realize is that as you do a load carriage event, your foot can change in size by up to half a size to a full size. Yep. And yet people aren't actually considering that when they buy a one-size boot. with a one size width to it. Likewise, how the boots lace up and how high the lacing up goes. And quite often you'll see operators who just won't even bother lacing the boots all the way up because they know it's going to affect their ankle range. So if they're not doing that, why aren't they doing that? Because they know it's affecting their performance. And we'll find with shorter males and particularly with shorter females, this restriction at the ankle becomes problematic.
Task-focused footwear, person-focused footwear, fit for purpose female, fit for purpose male, height for the situation, whether it be 8-inch or 6-inch. It's important that we put all those parameters in when thinking about footwear that is being issued to any first responder in our market.
Definitely, and I'd go even one step further with that, is that one brand will not fit all.
Correct.
Because just like you've got a variety, why do you have such a variety of running shoes on the market? Well, because some people will like one brand, some people like a totally different brand, and yet both people will swear by them and have the best performance with them. But as soon as you get them to wear each other's brand, that it becomes problematic. So even one brand can't fit everybody.